You are listening to the Marc Guzman Podcast Experience. Before we get started, just a reminder that you can find all of my available rental properties on my website at marcguzman.com. If you own investment property, click on the Owner Services section to see our complete list of services. Today's episode and tasting is sponsored by East Brother Beer. Located on Canal Boulevard in Point Richmond, East Brother Beer mixes a classic style of old with the precision and sensibility of the modern day to create the perfect beer experience. Today, we will be sampling the Bow Pills, provided by our sponsor, East Brother Beer Company. Since I started the podcast last August, I have had many guests from the City of Richmond. Each guest has had the same thing to say about the city, that it is becoming a better place to live and it's a city on the rise. Today, my guest is a man who is responsible for that. Richmond City Manager Bill Lindsay. Last month, Bill announced his retirement, leaving behind a city that was posting all-time lows in crime and unemployment. And after 13 years, Bill's leaving Richmond as a city that truly lives up to its motto, a city of pride and purpose. Well, Bill, thanks for coming on to the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, East Brother Beer is our show sponsor.
Okay.
And you have a great story to tell as far as a guest bartending. So, what happened there?
Well, East Brother Beer Company, it's one of my favorites, and the City of Richmond, along with some Chevron seed money, started a scholarship program called the Richmond Promise, which provides scholarships for high school students that are graduating. And it altogether, it's funded by about $35 million. We want to try to keep it going in perpetuity. Anyway, the Richmond Promise, I'm on their board. We do the occasional fundraiser, and we try to get the word out about the program. And one thing that East Brother did is they offered to host a fundraiser where they donated the proceeds of the beer sales to the Richmond Promise. And I was tapped, if you will, as a guest bartender. They're very serious about their beer. They wanted us there an hour early so they could make sure that we knew how to tap beer appropriately. They're interested in
There's
good
a skill
quality.
to it.
There absolutely is. And it was a lot of fun. Everybody there having a good time. And I figured if the city manager gig doesn't work out, I'm going back to a tap room and I'll be a bartender.
Yeah, I love East Brother Beer. I mean, they've come a long way from when they first opened up.
They have, and every time I go there now, and there's a lot of activity. It's it's family friendly, dog friendly. Even though it's a tap room, it feels like just a real family oriented kind of place, and you get the community has really embraced it. And, and they make good beer too.
Yeah, they do. And I think they've added like a pool table, ping pong to the mix.
Yeah, they have. And you can always find a food truck there as well for an evening meal.
Yeah. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how good were you as a bartender?
Well, I'll give myself a good solid 7. I got so I could get the little 3/4 to 1 inch of foam on the top, and I never really got the hang of filling the growlers, but that's a special talent, but I think I did okay, and I was actually working. The other guest bartenders were working the crowd, but I was actually behind the bar tapping the beer.
What was the training like?
It was to talk about how you may do the samples for folks, how to tap it so that it doesn't overfoam or underfill.
Okay.
And it was I got so that I could pull the lever, and I knew exactly how to tilt the glass and when to stop tilting the glass and shut off the tap. And I would imagine if you do it thousands and thousands of times, you get pretty good at it. But each one was an adventure for me.
Yeah. Very cool. So what are your thoughts on it seems like Richmond's having a beer boom going right now. Between East Brother Beer, you have Armistice, and even wine too.
Yeah, and Benoit Casper is another beer that's in Richmond. I'll get them in as I know East Brother may be your sponsor, but I'll get them as a...
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. We've had Armistice on the show. I don't think we've had them on the show.
Benoit Casper?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're good also.
Are they over there off of Pennsylvania?
They are, exactly.
Okay.
I think it's really terrific. There was an author, writer, his name is Jim Fellows. He writes for the Atlantic, and he did a study nationwide of the 11 top elements of a good downtown area. And he said, and one of these 11 things that they all have in common was they all had a tap room downtown. So we're not downtown yet with a tap room, but we've got some good. We got a great start with those three, and so that to me is one of the elements of a great downtown that's coming to Richmond.
Very cool. Now, are you getting ready to retire?
I am getting ready to retire. My last day, as it stands right now, is July 31st.
And how long have you been with the city now?
I've been with the city since February of 2005, so by the time I leave, it'll be 13 and a half years.
Well, cheers and congrats to a
thank
great
you.
run with the city.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So what's first on your agenda after you retire?
Well, ever since I announced that I was going to retire, I've had a lot of people give me advice, retired people. I don't. This is a new experience for me, certainly, and I think the first thing I'm going to do is take some time off and decompress a little bit, and figure out what I want to do. And people have said, take some time, and then when you start to do some things, and I want to be able to stay active in the community one way or the other, different things. They said, say yes to what you want to say yes to, and say no to what you don't want to do, and let that determine your daily activities. Mm-hmm. So that's what my intent is.
Okay. Are you a golfer, or do you like to travel?
I like to travel. I play a little bit of golf. Maybe I'll do a little bit more of that. I think the first place I'll travel to will just be my backyard. I think I'll just sort of enjoy being underfoot, I guess, as my wife might say. But I do enjoy gardening. I think I'm just going to try to relax and catch up on some reading and gardening and before I travel, and maybe use that time to plan what kind of trips you might want to take in the near future.
Mm-hmm. So you're the current City of Richmond manager, and many people know that most cities have a manager and the mayor. What does a manager specifically do? Yeah,
that's I think a good question. The quick sort of civics lesson is that Richmond is a council manager form of government, and that means that the city council, broadly speaking, all 7 of them, hire a city manager to run the day-to-day affairs of the city. So the kind of the simplest separation is that the city council makes policy and the city manager implements policy. So the mayor is on the policy side. He chairs the city council meetings. He has a policy agenda that he wants to pursue. But fundamentally, the legislation, the policies that the city council adopt, that's turned over to the city manager to manage the staff to get the work done, to implement that. So it's really interesting. I manage the police department, the fire department, every department of the city, with the exception of our police commission, which is separate and independent. Are departments of the city that I manage. So I get a lot of variety in my job. And the mayor is really good. Sometimes you get a city council that tries to involve itself in administration, but the mayor is always very clear that the manager runs the day-to-day affairs of the city. He doesn't interfere with that, and actually none of the city council members do. They really do respect that line. And it's important, I think, from a good government point of view. In fact, the city manager profession actually grew out of a good government movement in the 19s and 20s when they were worried about, when they were starting to build infrastructure and they were worried about contracts going to brothers-in-law where bridges might fall down rather than going to engineers. And the first city managers were actually engineers dealing with roads and infrastructure and sewers and things like that. And it's kind of evolved now to that, plus helping with the policy development with the city council.
Very interesting.
So I think it's a very good profession. I'm glad to have spent time in it.
And it's probably good that the city council is not getting themselves involved with the day-to-day operation.
I think so.
Makes your job easier,
It
right?
makes my job easier. You worry a lot about personnel decisions, having interference. This city council does not do that at all. It doesn't involve themselves in purchasing decisions or personnel decisions. They play that sort of good government separation very well, I think.
Now, you were prior to coming to Richmond, you were city manager at Orinda.
That's correct.
Correct?
Right.
What led you to become the city manager, and then what led you to go from Orinda to Richmond?
Well, what led me, what led me to be a city manager, just sort of my brief resume is I actually started my first job out of grad school, which is business school. Actually, second job. I did some management consulting as my first job out of business school. But my first job in local government, I was the finance director in Hercules, just up the road here. And I was fortunate to be able to come in at a young age, really, and an inexperienced age, to be the finance director for a city. The city manager who hired me took a big chance, and I'm grateful that he did that. I went from finance director in Hercules to administrative services director in San Ramon, and then city manager in Orinda, and then in Richmond. I joked that it was Richmond's turn to hire me, in Contra Costa County. But I became interested in city management even when I was back in high school, when I was on a youth council for a community where I grew up, and got an understanding of municipal functions. Orinda was a good place to work. I spent there about 10 years. About 10 years there. I had a great city council. Had some interesting projects that we worked on, and just going from Orinda to Richmond, it was really looking for a new challenge. It was looking for something different, some personal growth.
Was it transition? Because Orinda is known to be a pretty small town.
It is a small town.
And to go from a small town to a much bigger city like Richmond, was it difficult to transition? Because
Yes.
I'm sure Richmond had a lot more challenges.
Yeah, it was different. It was difficult for me, and I think that I think it's good the way you described it, because a lot of people say, "Well, gosh, you went from Orinda to Richmond, and those communities are completely different." But for me, the most difficult transition was not the service mix or the size of the budget. It was going from a small city where you're, as the manager, sometimes you're the chief cook and bottle washer, to a large city where I really had to learn more about delegation, how to get work done through the various departments, not to be so hands-on, and just the volume of the variety, if you will. So that was I'd say a difficult transition for me. It might not have been so hard for somebody else, but eventually I caught on, I guess.
Yeah. What was the biggest challenge going into Richmond back in 2005?
Well, back in 2005, Richmond was coming out of some really difficult financial times. In 2003, 2004, it really struggled. It considered at the time even declaring bankruptcy. They looked at that as an option. Got themselves into some financial trouble. Fortunately, a lot of the real hard work to keep that ship from sinking was done before I got to Richmond. And so when I got there in 2005, the finances were still difficult, but it wasn't teetering on bankruptcy. It was if you think about a fishing weight, it had hit the bottom of the lake, and it was just sort of dragging along the bottom. The weight was, but we really hadn't started climbing out of it. So for me coming in, the job I felt was to build the organization back in terms of its capabilities and what it needed to do to effectively serve the residents while living within these financial constraints. Mm-hmm. And that was the challenge. And the organization was, I would also describe it as being very damaged. People had been hurt by all the layoffs that had to be done to get the city from really going over the edge, and that was it was part of it was to providing some reassurance that we could get a lot of work done and we could serve the residents and we could live within our means, and providing that confidence that we could be a very good, responsive city.
Mm-hmm. Now, you went in 2005. Richmond's starting to come out of all these different problems. Then the 2007, 8, 9 crash hits.
Right.
How much did that affect the city?
It really was devastating. It was very, very tough. There were a lot of projects that were development projects that were in the pipeline. Our tax base was expanding. We were doing pretty well, balancing our budget again, and pensions, which were a topic now, certainly were not a topic then because the retirement system was well funded. And then the recession hit, and we went from, at the time, maybe about 7 or 8% unemployment to almost 20%, about 19% unemployment.
Yeah, that was about the state average too.
Yeah, that's right. And we were even above the state average. Thankfully, we're way down from that. But that was difficult. We still had the same needs that we always had as a community, only now even more so. With foreclosures, with more blight to deal with a declining tax base. We had, from over a 2-year period, we had a 37% drop in our property tax revenues, and which was at the time our largest single revenue source, and that was huge. So we had a difficult time, no question about it.
So you were really thrown into learning.
Yeah.
A lot of different challenges handling a big city.
Right. Yeah. It was not something I really would have wished on me or wished on the community. But sometimes you have to play the hand you're dealt, and that was one of them. And
you had a lot of support too.
I had great support. The management staff did very well through it, and the city council, I think, made good decisions. They understood that what needed to get done. What I wanted to try to do is not to repeat what had been done in 2003, 2004, where we had to just devastate the organization. My goal, really, throughout the 13 years I've been there, it's always been to try to keep things as stable as possible, because I think that a municipal organization, really any organization, will do better in the long term if you're not having wide swings or letting wide swings in revenues or expenditures affect you, so that you don't know what the customer expectations, or the customer doesn't know what their expectations should be. So, and the stability helps with the employment. The employees are, they're hopefully not worried about, will I have a job tomorrow? They can think about what the job is in front of them today. And so we weathered the recession with some deficit budgets. We really cut into our reserves a lot, something I never really wanted to do. But it was also, I would describe it as being strategic. And I'm glad we came out of the recession when we did, because now the cash is back up to where it should be. But we haven't grown very much. We haven't added back a whole lot of staff. Again, trying to keep that stability, even with that better tax base, better employment.
I would imagine some of those decisions are extremely difficult to make. I mean, you're really weighing so many different options, and you're not quite sure how the outcome in the end is going to be, right? That's
exactly right. You're trying to do the best you can. And as you mentioned, I did have a lot of support, and I think the city council, when presented with the information, made some good decisions. They knew, I would say, what the risks were. They understood what would be good in the long term for the city organization, and I think they did their jobs very well.
So, coming out of all that, what was your goal as a city manager?
Coming out of that, there were financially there were two things. Number one was to get back to balancing the budget, get back to something where it was a sustainable, long-term financial path. That was number one. And the second thing financially was to build our cash reserves back up to a level that was prudent, safe, so that we could weather, hopefully not too many, but weather other storms that may come along. And in our reserves in particular, build up our cash reserves. And some of the things we're still working on financially, believe it or not, go back to 2003, 2004, where funds had these negative balances, and not to get too deep in the weeds on the accounting side of things, but we had to clear deficits in these individual funds, and the only way really to do that was to build up our cash reserves to be able to pay those off. Mm-hmm. So operationally, it was continuing. I think it's always really been about continuous improvement, and the fact that we had some revenue growth, the fact that our finances were stable, more sustainable. I still worry about that, but those were really the objectives.
So knowing these challenges, what made you decide to take the job as city manager?
Well, that in some respects, that is why I took the job as a city manager.
For the challenges.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and you were recommended by Phil Bachelor, correct?
I was recommended by Phil, and he contacted me about the job, and he was very honest about it. He said it was going to be a hard job, but I'd known Phil a little bit, just from our paths had crossed throughout work we had done together in Contra Costa County, and I don't know why, but he thought I could do the job, and he asked if I'd consider applying, and I'm really happy I said yes. And Phil is an interesting person, and I don't think I'm revealing anything out of school here, but Phil is a very spiritual person, and he felt, in sort of the old puritanical sense here, that this was a calling, to work in a community that was challenged. If you did have the ability to help, there was this sort of calling to do so, and whether one is spiritual in that way or not, I think there's a little piece of that. Mm-hmm. This was a community that was struggling. Phil at least thought I had the ability to help, and so it was almost an obligation. And mm-hmm. I kind of feel that way, and he certainly did.
Richmond's definitely come a long way. I remember I got into real estate 15 years ago, and Richmond had a bit of a negative stigma attached to it, mm-hmm. right? Mainly it came down to crime and mainly certain areas, right? And it's really come a long way since then. And in fact, I believe, if I remember correctly, back when I got into real estate, Richmond would make the top 10 worst cities mm-hmm. when it came down to crime. Now it's not even on that list anymore.
Right.
So there's been a lot of progress along the way. Where do you see Richmond going in the future?
I think that I see continued progress. One thing that is really hard for us to shake is that reputation. And I think it is a reputation that I like to think a decade ago that continues to follow us around. You're absolutely right. We were in the top 10. We were, I think, maybe top 5 even of what was considered the most dangerous cities in the United States, at least in our size category. And now we're not on that list. We've really reduced crime a great deal, and we do a survey of our residents every 2 years, and to find about services and attitudes and so forth. And we ask the same questions, so we get a trend line. And one thing that is really interesting to see is that every 2 years, a larger percentage of our residents think that Richmond is going the right direction, and every year a larger percentage of our residents are saying that they feel safer in the community and safer and safe in their neighborhoods. And that really is that's really good to see. There's been a lot of talk about the drop in the number of homicides. I think we at least in my tenure, we peaked at 46.
Yeah, and I think Richmond just went through a stretch, right, of 4.5 months of what was that stat for? Like 4.5 months of,
from November through March, almost 5 months, we had zero homicides.
Right?
That's right. And I think it's great that you raised that, because to me, I think the city should shoot for having zero homicides. There's no reason that homicides need to be a statistic other than a zero. I think that's possible. I think that will take time. It'll take continued work by not just what we do, but by residents and their attitudes. And but there's no reason to think that we can't be much lower in crime and completely free of homicides. That should be the goal. We shouldn't tolerate anything less than that.
Mm-hmm. Now, how's the culture of the city government itself? Like, I assume there's a lot of culture that's developed from the residents from the city itself. How do you see the collaboration between the government and the residents?
Well, one thing that is I'll contrast, say, Richmond and Orinda. Orinda, even from the residential perspective, they looked to their municipal government as being small, relatively limited services, certain things to get the job done, but not necessarily big government. Richmond residents really place a lot of important and a lot of value in government services. I think part of it is based on the demographics of the population. You have lower income, more disadvantaged communities. They look to their local government to really help in those different ways. Job development is an important city function. Certainly it was not an important city function in Orinda. Economic development, economic expansion, economic opportunities, all those things are very important in Richmond. And the residents look to the city to be a leader in doing those, in advancing that. So you're absolutely right. That there's a different perspective on the value that our residents place in their municipal services.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some of the new things happening in Richmond. Richmond has a lot. In fact, Richmond's been in the news quite a bit, and part of that is because there's so much going on in Richmond. So let's talk about some of the new Richmond developments.
Okay.
And going into some of the newer developments. What are the goals of these developments? And maybe if you can actually break down, what are maybe the top 3 developments going into Richmond?
Let me sort of break it down maybe geographically that's the easiest way for me to think about it. Let me go from sort of maybe south to north. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. So we several years ago we completed a specific planning document for our southern shoreline, which includes the University of California field station. And for a while, the university was talking about the Berkeley Global Campus and doing a new campus there. They suspended work on that particular concept, but our communication with them is that they're still very interested in working with a developer to develop a research campus there. I think that can be a catalyst along the southern shoreline. There's another site right next to it, so-called Zeneca site, former Stauffer Chemical, needs a lot of soil remediation, but both the Richmond field station and the Zeneca site are beautifully situated right along San Francisco Bay, and those are tremendous opportunities for investment. So I see that coming along. We have some projects right now that are either under construction or in the last pieces of the entitlement phase along the shoreline near Point Richmond. Shea Homes is doing a project of around 75 homes right along the shore. The Laconia development has received their entitlements to do 300 condominium units along the shore. It's the Terminal 1 project. It's right near Miller Knox Park. That, I think, is one of the premier sites in the Bay Area. I'm not exaggerating. I think that if you go out there, you look at the views, expansive views across the bay towards San Francisco, and it's just marvelous.
It's always nice to hear when housing is going in.
It is. Housing, in definitely a housing crunch, and the city council is very much wanting to increase the housing supply. So I say good for them. I think that is an important policy. Moving a little bit to the north, we have our downtown development. Right now, we're in contract with a developer for development right near the BART station. We want to really try to focus on developing our transit village, bringing more units, hopefully around at least, I'd say, a minimum of 500 new housing units right adjacent to the BART station, which does two things. It's good for, of course, good smart growth planning to put housing near transit, but also it brings a lot of rooftops into our downtown area, and we'll get that tap room downtown and some other things as well. So there's that. Hilltop Mall was recently purchased about a year ago.
They have a big event coming up, I think, next week.
They do, and so they're rebranding it as the Shops at Hilltop. They've got some plans to not just redo the retail component, but they have long-term plans to bring in more housing in that area as well. It'll complement the retail. It'll bring more housing into the region. Then the other piece of economic development that is maybe overlooked, and this is sort of non-residential, and that is that Richmond is becoming a hub for warehousing and distribution. Over the last 5 years, we have had Blue Apron, HelloFresh, Williams-Sonoma, Restoration Hardware.
Did Amazon go?
Amazon has a fulfillment center out there. And all of these are within the last 5 years, part really of this new economy that is around getting on your computer and ordering a meal and having it on your doorstep the next day, or getting a piece of merchandise.
It's very convenient. Yeah,
it is convenient, and Richmond has, in talking to these folks about their location decision, Richmond is well situated to get to Marin County. Moving up to Solano County, down in the entire East Bay. So it's really a terrific location.
Yeah, I live in Richmond right now, and I tell people it's one of the best priced areas in the entire Bay Area right now. you can find affordable properties. Then if you want to go to San Francisco, it's literally 20 or 40 minutes depending on the traffic. Mm-hmm. But you can shoot over to Napa, Marin County, right. Sonoma, Solano, go up to Tahoe. I mean, there's so many things you can do.
Right. Well, one thing I'll just touch on from an economic development perspective is the fact that we have ferry service coming to Richmond in October of this year. Mm-hmm. Right at the end of Harbor Way by the Craneway Pavilion and Ford Building. AM and PM commute service. I've done the practice run. It's about a half an hour. And I sort of joke that you'll be able to get from the city of Richmond to downtown San Francisco faster than you can get from the Richmond district in San Francisco to downtown San Francisco. Because it really does cut off a lot of traffic, and it's just a great commute. I think that it'll be popular the day it opens.
And when is that expected to open?
In October of 2018, this year. Okay. In fact, the ferry terminal is under construction right now, and the boats are being built. And
I love taking the ferry, but I've always had to go to. Really, you have to go to Vallejo.
From here, the best thing is to go to Vallejo, but you'll be able to get on the ferry in Richmond.
Yeah, that's going to be great.
It will be. It will be.
Yeah.
Richmond is sort of a multimodal paradise in terms of transportation too. We have BART, Amtrak, ferry service now, AC Transit, and then we're looking at some first mile, last mile transportation strategies. So transportation is fun.
Yeah. Now, what about North Richmond? Because I know North Richmond, part of that's county, and then there's a small section that's city.
Right.
And I believe right now there's discussion about possibly annexing the county area.
There's discussions about annexing the unincorporated area of North Richmond. We did a fiscal analysis, and we don't gain anything from a tax revenue perspective for annexing North Richmond. But there, on the other side of things, from a service perspective, I think it probably is better government to not have the sheriff come over and provide police services, but have that done by the Richmond Police Department, not have an island of fire service that's county fire, have that done by Richmond, and so on and so forth. And but the tack really is to give North Richmond residents a choice. This is not something that anybody should view as a hostile takeover. It's something that we want to develop the kind of all the paperwork that might need to go into annexation, and then give North Richmond residents a choice about whether or not they want to proceed.
Has there been discussion about maybe, because Richmond has several county areas, jurisdiction areas, Arlington, McBride, up in that area, up in the hills.
Right.
Has there been discussion about that area too?
No, it's really, the only discussion has been North Richmond. I think that there might have been some discussions about areas in El Sobrante and those areas you're talking about some years ago, but that's not really on the planning stage right now.
Mm-hmm. So I do property management, mm-hmm. and big topic in Richmond is rent control. Rent control recently passed. So I get a lot of owners that come to me, and they don't quite understand the process of how rent control works, and mainly the initial steps. Like, they come to me, well, what do I need to do to register? What's the process to get the property registered with the rent board and be in compliance?
In terms of
and you had the fun job of when it passed, your office was an interim rent board.
That's exactly right. And we had staff members from my office, I think, that did a great job with that. Our philosophy in terms of setting up the systems was to make it paperless and try to make it as easy as possible for landlords and tenants. And so
and thank you for that option, by the way.
Oh, sure. Excuse me. And so the best thing for landlords to do is to go on the city's website, and there's a very pronounced rent board section. You can register all your properties online. We encourage people to do that, and it establishes the base rent. It's important to have that baseline information in there. And so the idea was to make it as simple as possible. If you don't want to do it online, you can go into the rent office and fill out the form. That's always a possibility. But most people want to try to do it online and avoid some of the paperwork. But that's the easiest way is to look at our rent board site and what I understand from talking to landlords, they say it goes very smoothly.
Mm-hmm. And I believe many people don't know this, is that if you're a landlord and you have an agent or a property management company, you have to register them as an agent for your property, correct?
I think that's right. I think that's part of the registration process and the information collection. Part of that is simply we want to make sure that we're getting information to the group that needs to know it. And so that's why it's helpful to have the property manager as well.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say it's pretty convenient, easy to go online and just register the property. For the property owners out there, you also need the business license, which the business license has been around since what year? I want to say 2000? Maybe even older than that?
I think it may be even older than that. I think that the rental property piece was added in the late 1990s. So it's been around a long time, and probably maybe not enforced the way it should have been in terms of collections. And when I say that, it's not really just about collecting all the money we can, but we want to make sure everybody complies. It's sort of it's just fair. But
you need that in order to register the property with the rent board.
That's correct. Right. You need to be in compliance with the business license ordinance and register the property, and hopefully things will go smoothly from there.
Now, are a lot of departments trying to switch more and more to a paperless system?
Well, we are. We maybe not as fast as even we should be, but we are moving in that direction. One of the things that we're doing, just as an example, is for just in our building department, is to have online arrangement for inspections and phone arrangement for inspections, so you don't have to come in to call for an inspection.
And that's active right now?
That, I think, is being rolled out within the next few months.
Okay.
And really, it helps us in terms of being more productive, and that's what, we were talking before about the recession. I think that one thing that, as we downsized through attrition, one of the things our employees have done really well is become more productive using technology and using the way they deploy staff. I think that, and people are doing a good job.
Mm-hmm. Now, as a city manager, you're managing multiple departments, and you're dealing with so many people on varying levels of power within their job description. How much of a challenge is it to manage these people and to get things done? And this is more of a general in a city environment, not specifically Richmond.
Well, I think that I do think management is really more of an art than a science. One of the things Phil Bachelor used to say, he said that he used to love to read management books, giving advice on how to manage organizations, and he said all of them were right. And I think that what I like to do is I try to work through the department heads. I try to empower them to take control of their objectives, their goals in their department. I'm not somebody who gets too far into the weeds in terms of these different functions. I really do rely on the managers to understand what the city council's goals are, understand what my priorities are, to implement those council policies, and
so there's really a lot of trust.
There has to be, and what I used to say about, somebody asked me, what do you have to do to get fired by Bill Lindsay, and my answer was, if I find myself having to do your job, then I don't need you. So always do your job, do it well, and you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. In your career as city manager for Richmond and Orinda and the various other cities you've worked in, what has been the biggest lesson you've learned in life?
Oh gosh, biggest lesson I've learned in life, as in terms of how to manage a community, perhaps, is that?
Yeah,
or,
it could be anything.
Well, one of the things that you know, I think I can be accused of just borrowing words from smart people and learn from.
I think that's
from
what
those.
smart people do.
Maybe so. There was a German philosopher, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. He was a philosopher and writer, and one of the things he said was, treat people as if they are what you want them to become, and you help them to become what they're capable of being. And I just, on a different twist on that, I find that's the same about communities, that you treat the community as if it is what you want it to become, and you help that community become what it's capable of being. And time again, as I've been working here in Richmond, people don't intend to do it, but they're always trying to say dumb it down for Richmond, or lower their expectations for Richmond, and say that Richmond can't have well-maintained parks because Richmond doesn't have well-maintained parks, or that we can't achieve our financial stability because that hasn't been our history. And from my perspective, we need to get past the thinking that holds us back and really aspire to what we want to do. Maybe not what we can do today, but what we want to do in the future, in the long term. And I think that approach helps you focus on trying to deliver quality, on always trying to get better, on focusing on what the long-term needs of the community are. The Richmond Promise Scholarship Program is a good example of that, where Richmond right now doesn't have a college-going culture among its high school students, but there's no reason it can't. We can help nurture that and change that so that our educational system becomes what for our students, what for our young people, what we want it to be. And to me, that's been kind of a touchstone that I've really learned that's important. And I think that's the case no matter where you are in whatever community you're working in.
So you took the philosophy and basically applied it to city management.
I guess that's right. Yeah, that's right. And it's...
And you're leaving the city now with a surplus.
Well, we're not there yet necessarily. We do, our reserves are much better. I hope it's on the way, and we're in the budget preparation process now. I think every year is going to be a little bit of a struggle to balance the budget, but I'm confident that we'll get there. If we get there with a balanced budget, we'll get there with more money in the bank this year than last year, with revenues equaling expenditures, so it's not a drawdown on our reserves. And we had a nice a gift a few months ago. We had a credit rating uptick from Standard & Poor's. Not something we asked for, but something they did on their regular review. They gave us an upgrade, and they changed our outlook from neutral to positive. And so I think it was a good recognition of the work that we had done to get our financial house in order. And now that we're starting to do that, I think it's really important that we stay there. Certainly there are some things on the horizon that will be difficult, but I think we have a good path. I think we've got a good trajectory.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up, because I know a lot of people are very quick to criticize not just Richmond, but any city as to whether they're doing a good job, bad job, and if something's not in their interest. Everyone's quick to criticize and nitpick at negative items. And I think a lot of people don't realize what it takes to run a city. And the bigger the city, the more complex it is. And more people should get involved in local politics.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what's the number one easiest way for people to get involved in the local politics?
Well, I think number one, it's really staying informed about what's going on. I think sometimes, unfortunately, the way media has gone, it may be more difficult. With print media, different than it used to be. But there's still ways to stay informed, and I would say through let's call it mainstream media sources, like if you don't get the newspaper online, or I'm sorry, it delivered to your door, look at it online. I do a weekly report. Try to look at the weekly report. Go to the city's website. Spend just a few minutes each week about looking at what's going on. We try to keep that current, and then once you're an informed resident, then I would encourage you to access your council members and let them know your opinions about some of the policies. Our doors are at the staff level are always open, and I think it's really important for us to hear from residents. Sometimes we can always do better. That's the one thing that we need to know, and we have different ways to access the staff. We can always do better, and we want to learn from that. There are some things that are resource constrained we just can't do, but we have about $160 million operating budget, and when people say, on the staff, they say, well, we don't have enough money to do something, I always remind them, well, we do have $160 million we're spending on something, and for those things that we're spending the money on, we need to do it very well. Mm-hmm. So I'd say that's it. Get informed, stay informed, access the staff, access council members. We want to hear from residents.
It helps you do your job.
Absolutely.
So you're retiring soon. Right now, you mentioned that you're not quite sure what the next step is. Do you see yourself at some point maybe going into a different type of government job? Or is it you're done with government?
I haven't really thought about it that much, but what I will tell you is that I really love local government. I think it is because it is the closest to the people that it serves. I love it in that way. I love public service. It's really been important to me, and I don't think I would find it as rewarding at higher levels, state or federal levels. I don't think I'd find it as rewarding. I wouldn't be able to hear the voice of the customer. I wouldn't be able to see a development project being built that we had a hand in helping to plan. So I'm pretty certain that I won't go back into take a permanent city manager job. I think that's probably left for the next generation, let's call it. It's time for me not to go to night meetings, but I really do hope that there are opportunities, and I think there may be opportunities for me to stay connected with public service and community service, and I hope that's the case.
Okay, so before we finish off this podcast here, I do want to ask you, favorite restaurant in Richmond?
Well, I'm tempted to say I love all my children equally, but if I have to pick one, I will go with Salute's.
Love Salute's.
Because of course the owner is a very dear person and gives so much to the community. That Memby is a community treasure. The food is great. They serve East Brother beer at the bar. And so it's and the views of the water I really enjoy. So there's other restaurants I love too, but if to pick one, I'll say that Salute's because Memby puts it over the top.
And if anyone goes to Salute, I do have to say you have to try the lasagna.
Oh yeah,
It's It's classic Rome style lasagna. And I was in Rome several years ago, and I went to a small little trattoria, like off to this like this tiny little alleyway, but I saw someone sitting at the door, a little trattoria sign right above it. So I went, sat down, had lasagna, and I'm like, this is like salute lasagna. And so literally next week I get back to Richmond and I go to Salute, and I'm like, maybe this lasagna tastes identical to the one I had in Rome. She says, exactly. It's the exact same recipe as Roma lasagna.
Yeah, she's does more than just greet people at the door. She's definitely knows her food and wine, and everything there is got a little touch of her knowledge.
And she does amazing things for the community, like you
absolutely.
said. I mean, she does. I think it's on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, where she has a lot of the local homeless population
That's
come
on
in.
Thanksgiving.
For Thanksgiving.
I've been a waiter at Salute's too, serving on Thanksgiving, and she opens her doors, and it's been really touching for me, and I've had my wife and son also do that, and it's it's just neat to see people coming in and having a Thanksgiving meal at a white tablecloth restaurant. They feel special, and I certainly feel special being able to serve them.
Yeah. Well, Bill, thanks for being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Hope you enjoyed the beer.
I did.
And good luck to your retirement and playing golf, traveling, and whatever you decide to do.
I'll figure it out. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our guest, Bill Lindsay, for joining us today. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lubman. And a big thank you to our sponsor, East Brother Beer, for providing us with today's beer tasting. For more information about today's beer and East Brother Beer, go to their website at www.eastbrotherbeer.com. And for more information on what I do as a property manager, visit my website at marcguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.